Hey, everybody. So we are live, Marie. And
Hello.
hi. And my name is Genevieve Williams Comrie. I am the executive director of Afro Resistance, and accompanied is.
My name is Marie Ferreira, and I'm the communications coordinator at Afro Resistance.
And today, we've been coordinating and doing a lot of video conferences lately, and they have been going really well, super well attended. And we have been working really hard to provide language interpretation and accessibility to people. And we have provided that so far in 3 languages, so English, Spanish, and French. And while things are going really well, participants are really happy with it. We understand there have been some glitches and some folks have been impatient with us. So we decided, let's get on a video conference or a video. I don't know. This is not a video conference. A video
No,
to kind of
a
explain
Facebook Live, maybe.
a Facebook Live to kind of explain some of the misconceptions around it based on some of the questions that we have gotten from people. So let's get on it.
Yeah, I think especially because like many people are moving to online events and online service, it's good to have like this conversation and the most frequent questions that we got, so we can help people to understand like how we are doing it and why we do what we do.
So I think the first question, Marie, is what is, when folks come in, they're like, well, why can't we just offer interpretation? What is like, can we just offer interpretation? So Marie, can you explain to us a little bit the differences between the different types of interpretation and why can't we just offer interpretation like at an hour before the conference call?
Yes. So there is this assumption that interpretation is free and easy, and interpreters just have like to connect to be online, standing waiting for the conference. So interpretation not just happens. There is like a whole work behind it, and before that, and even after that we have to do. And I think we can say that like kind of a second question is the what you said about the types of interpretation, right? So there is consecutive and simultaneous interpretation. So consecutive interpretation is when a person speaks and then they pause to allow the interpreter to repeat what has been said in another language. You hear the speaker's voice, and then the consecutive interpretation. And simultaneous interpretation, that is the second type of interpretation that we do as well, is speaking on the context of online conversation. You see the speaker, but you select an option, select a button, or sometimes call a different number via your phone to hear the interpretation real time with no interruption in the flow of the conversation. So this is how interpretation works in an online setting. And based on that, we also receive so many questions about language, like how many languages what we offer. Can we just do English? Can we just do Spanish? So it's that's another question that we wanna highlight here, and I think Genevieve can speak about like why we don't just offer Spanish. Sometimes people say, oh, it's hard to follow a conversation in more than one language when we have Spanish and Portuguese, or we have Portuguese, English, and Spanish, English. So, Genevieve, what do you think about that?
Absolutely, Marie. So one of the questions that we have actually gotten is, oh my goodness, like it's so confusing, all these languages. Why can't you just offer Spanish and done, and why can't it just be done live time? So it's not so confusing, so I don't have to leave the thing and go to another room, which Marie will kind of get into a little bit later. So, one of the things is to understand Afro resistance works around the African diaspora in Latin America and the Caribbean. Yes, Spanish is the most widely spoken language in Latin America, and it is the primary language in every single country in South America, well, most every country in South America, except for Brazil, Suriname, and French Guyana. Spanish is also spoken in some Caribbean countries, such as Puerto Rico, Cuba, and some other islands, right? So that's the first thing to keep in mind. So Spanish is not the only language that is spoken in Latin America and the Caribbean. So Portuguese is spoken throughout South America, but it is a primary language of only one nation, which is Brazil. But guess what? Brazil is the most populated and the largest country in South America. So even though Portuguese is not the primary language elsewhere on the continent, almost half of the population of South America actually speaks it. And a lot of people from Brazil migrate through other countries in Latin America. So they have communities, like in the United States, where there's large communities that only speak Spanish. There's large communities that only speak Portuguese. So we've dealt with Spanish and we've dealt with Portuguese. So French and Creole are spoken in certain areas of Latin America, including Haiti and French Guyana, where it's the primary language. Keep in mind, though, it's difficult to say how many other languages are spoken in Latin America and the Caribbean, but we do know that there is also Jamaican Creole, there's Garifuna, there's Mayan, there's Quechua, and there's language of the Incas and a lot of other indigenous languages. There's also Dutch that's spoken in Latin American region, in Suriname in South America, and in some of the Caribbean islands. So while I'm really proud that Afro-Resistance is really offering Spanish and Portuguese interpretation, guess what? It is simply not enough. It's just not enough. So yes, and it seems complicated and really tedious as a listener, as a participant, to sit through the back and forths between Spanish, Portuguese, and English, we're still not covering most of the region. We're covering a very small percentage of the region, but we're doing the most that we can right now. We do want to increase, though, and offer the other languages. And with that, technology, we're going to have to adjust to technology, and we're going to have to adjust our level of patience. That's also going to have to come, right? So the biggest thing here is, if we want to really, really unify the region, especially Black people, we're just not unified through one language or two languages. It's several languages, and Afro-Resistance is only covering 3 of those languages. So we still need to do better, and folks need to be a little bit patient. Another, and Marie, as a person, as our media person that does this all the time, you get this question very constant. So, Marie, can you just help me set up the Zoom or the WebEx or StreamYard so we can just have an online, conversation that is interpreted? Like, can you just not do that really quick? Usually, like 3 or 4 hours before my conference call happens.
Sometimes 30 minutes before the conversation, but no, the answer is no, because there is this assumption that the platform itself offers the interpretation. But there is actually a lot of work around doing the tests with the speakers, setting up the system, the computer with the speakers, sometimes with the attendees, providing support with the attendees in multiple languages, right? Not just with the interpretation. There's also all the marketing around multiple languages, sending emails in different languages, and set the work with the interpretation, with the interpreters themselves. So even if you have a platform, whichever you choose to do your work, or any of them, like Zoom, Webex, Google Meetings, I don't know, or even if you have a private service, you not just like set up the settings in your account. There's actually like a lot of work that we have to do before that, and sometimes during the call itself, to make sure that everyone receiving the information, everyone is participating, everyone is being heard, because we can't assume also that everyone that is attending your event is used to online platforms. So you can just like send the link with option to different languages and do not give support to the attendees themselves. So you have to have people they are working before, during, and after the conversation, right? And sometimes because of all those all this work, right? We get sometimes technical issues, and this is normal, especially because we are leading with technology that is not owned by us; it's owned by someone else. We don't really have the power to control that technology. Some people get really impatient, and I think we can answer that one. That is the question: why do English speakers get so impatient with interpretation?
Well, this is something that baffles all of us at times, and it's manifested in several ways, right? So one of the ways that it's manifested, it's one, accusatory around, well, I can't understand a thing. And it might be that they jumped on a Facebook Live at the moment that a Spanish speaker was speaking. And of course, you're not going to understand what the person is speaking. But if you tune in and you listen, you might understand certain things. We also always, to deal with that specifically, we also always encourage people to sign up through the Zoom, because Facebook Live and all these different platforms, you're only going to be able to hear the person that's speaking unless we're doing interpretation, right? Which type of interpretation is that, Marie, that you're doing it next to the person or at the
That
same
we're doing at the same time? Consecutive.
consecutive. So unless we're doing consecutive interpretation, which takes a long time to do, you're not going to be able to hear the person being interpreted at the same time, being translated at the same time. But it's always for this is always a way that it's another way that people don't realize how US-centered their needs are above others. And that's, I think, at the core of things. And sometimes I have to catch myself too when I'm entering spaces where I don't, and I speak, I speak 2 languages and I understand 3. And sometimes I can, feel that impatience as well. Many people think that once you provide interpretation from one language to English, that's enough. But what we don't always realize is that the people that do not speak English also want to be heard, understood. They also want to hear, and they also want to understand. So it's not only providing interpretation from English to Spanish and to Spanish to English, or from Portuguese to English and English to Portuguese. It's also providing interpretation from Portuguese to Spanish, from Spanish to Portuguese. And that means that sometimes English is going to not be a primary, it's not a primary, it's sometimes that English is going to be translated or interpreted second or third and not first. And that's all that means. The same way that the Spanish speakers or the Portuguese speakers or the Creole speakers have been waiting for their third or fourth, slot to be interpreted, English sometimes will fall into that third or fourth slot. And that is okay. It's a time to take belly breaths and also to start learning new languages, because the more we listen to other languages, it's an opportunity for us to start learning different words. Some people, for example, want people to interpret names. And it's like, pay attention, because you can hear the names that person said. Some people have asked and requested that we interpret African prayer. And we can't interpret African prayer because the speaker is speaking in Spanish and doing a prayer in an African language. So that means you don't tune out as the person is speaking. You're tuned in, and then you're waiting for a translation that is a reinforcement. As I mentioned before, English is not the only nor the central language in the region, and Afro-Resistance is not going to center it as that. And our calls and workshops are not designed to center US speaking audiences only. We're designed to center everybody.
Yeah, and it includes our email, social media as well. Like if you were following us on social media, sometimes you can find the same flyer, the same information on Facebook in three different languages at the same time. But if you don't, just scroll the screen, just look at our feed, that you're gonna find the same information in English or Spanish or Portuguese in a different post in a different place. So it's always there. Sometimes it just takes a few more minutes or a few more seconds to get the information or to find it. And I think that comes brings the question of how expensive the interpretation, right, Javier? Because of all this work that we are talking here, that we are saying here, that not just the platform itself, but the work that we put
Correct.
during the whole process.
Absolutely. So this is, and I have a truck going past me. I hope it passes really fast. It is what it is. All right. So yes, how expensive is interpretation? You know, sadly, interpretation is often an expense that is not incorporated into most forms of organizing. I think slowly that's changing, but as it usually is, folks still expect it for free. And it's usually an afterthought, meaning that it's added at the very last minute and with no resources. So interpreters doing this work are mostly women. Like if we look at the vast majority of people that are doing this work throughout the region as well, it's mostly women. And Afro Resistance as an organization, we have been centering Black people doing this work because we know how to translate things that are unsaid. So for example, what does that look like? We ask somebody like, well, did you see them? The answer is mm-hmm or mm. Interpreters that are Black know how to interpret that, and listeners that are also Black know how to catch those subtle messages, right? So we really center and we prioritize having Black interpreters for those kinds of things. Now, what also has to be taken into account is that there are technological realities in the region's countries. So in the countries, Latin America and the Caribbean, there are many communities where Black people are that they don't have access to a Wi-Fi, for example. So they're using their own personal data on their phones. What this means for interpretation is our interpreters have to establish, as Marie said before as well, a pre-presentation plan with each individual panelist in order to figure out what best works for that panelist and what best works for the interpreter, which is not the same case always as interpreting for somebody that's in the United States, where we know they're going to have access to Wi-Fi, where they can just go into a Zoom account and boom, they're connected, and we know that it's a reliable source. We've had people in Venezuela, in Colombia, in Brazil, that the rain starts and they lose signal. It is what it is. So that interpreter is also doing a lot of personalized work with that panelist to make sure our listening audience gets the best thing. Many operations pay interpreters between $100 and $125 per hour. And interpreters cannot work alone in events that are multiple hours. It just can't work. There needs to be at least 2 interpreters so that they can get a break. And yes, believe it or not, we must pay for these breaks. And I wholly endorse and believe that we have to pay people for their breaks the same way that, workers' rights are workers' rights. For many reasons, and because they can't do other work during these breaks. So some interpreters do solidarity work, but that is fully up to them. Afro Resistance always pays their interpreters, and they have a choice to donate their fees to an organization of their choice if they choose to. But remember, the more languages, the more it costs. So remember that equation that we shared earlier on between, we providing English, Spanish to Portuguese. It sounds like 2 languages, right? English to Spanish, English to Portuguese. It's actually English to Spanish, English to Spanish, Spanish to Portuguese, Portuguese to Spanish, Spanish to English to Portuguese, Portuguese. So it's 6 different interpretations that we're providing. It doesn't mean 6 people. It could mean 3 people. It could mean 4 people. It just really depends on the combination of things, how long the call is, how many participants, how many panelists from a specific language. So it all means that. The core here is that we shouldn't assume that it's a free service. We should assume, as we do with organizers or panelists that we offer stipends to, or the service, if people have a Zoom or any form of account that they're paying for that service, we should assume that we have to pay human beings, all human beings, for their services. So, linked to the platforms, Mari, how actually does a multilingual webinar work?
It really depends on their service, but I think we can say that it's a space where everyone is heard, everyone speaks, everyone participates, and the language is not a barrier to anyone, right? And I think especially if we say about some cultural context, especially for English speakers, sometimes it's easier to say that, oh, it's just the way it is. Like, everyone should speak English because it facilitates the conversation, instead of actually confronting US imperialism that is also exposed to language, right? So a multilingual webinar works in a way that everyone is welcome and nobody is left behind or out because they don't speak a specific language. And it includes on the chat, if you're talking via chat, it includes if you are receiving information via email, it includes if you want ask a question for the speaker, but I speak Portuguese and you speak Spanish, or you speak English and I speak Spanish. So how does it actually work? So it's a space where I can ask my questions, I can share my thoughts, and I'm sure that the person that is on the other side of the screen is gonna hear me, is gonna understand me, and we have this experience, this space that welcome everyone. I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Melody. So something else that we have come across is people saying before they reach out to interpreters or before they reach out to us, I'm offering language interpretation, and I put it on my flyer. So I need to offer a multilingual conversation. Can you all help me with that? And what's our answer to that?
Yes. It's really what we said in the beginning, that is like there is a commitment with the whole strategy that involves that conversation, that webinar, or that event. So we have this commitment to make sure that your audience is receiving the information in their preferred language. There is a commitment to with the people who are in your database, right, in your email, to make sure that they receive the information in their preferred language. A commitment that people who are coming in your webinar know how to use the system, that they can use the chat, they can speak using the microphone, they can interact with the speakers in the preferred language. So it's not just really the platform itself, as I said so many times here. It's not just the flyer, it's not just marketing, not just promotion, but we have to work around all this strategy to make sure that people this space is a space with justice language. That, as Jean-Pierre said, that we are addressing Portuguese speakers, Spanish speakers, English speakers, and in a near future, I hope speakers of so many other languages in Latin America.
I'm mute again. All right. I think we have covered most of them, Marie?
I think so. I think just to close it here, maybe you can tell us like what happens in a meeting when language justice is applied.
So I for language justice, I'm typing it so it also comes through, is applied. So I first want to, before I answer this, I want to credit a lot of this a lot of the knowledge around language justice to Caracol interpreters, specifically to Liliana, because they gave us a workshop in Colombia around language justice, and it was a bilingual workshop in English and in Spanish. And how Liliana explained that was that that language justice basically is the way where people can both be heard and hear, be understood and understand in a way that they feel the most powerful. So, and that could change, right? So if I feel the most powerful speaking in Spanish, I should have every single right and support and resources around me for me to be able to speak in Spanish. The same way that that might be Portuguese for some of our colleagues at Afro Resistencia, or that might be Spanish, or it might be English or Creole for some of our collaborators and contributors. It means that the language that we are most powerful in, or we feel most powerful in, we should be able to exercise, and that should be supported and held by the organizations and the community that is really embracing us, or saying that they are embracing us, because I think there's a distinction there. So I think that's it.
Yeah, I think so.
So if you all have any other questions around language, about initiatives, if you would also like to, if you're a Black person from Latin America or the Caribbean, speaks multiple languages, if you would like to join Afro Resistance, not only for the language portfolio, but to join Afro Resistance and collaborate with us and work with us, please, email us. You can, we have a media email.
Mm-hmm. It's media@afroresistance.org.
And I put it here, media@afroresistance.org. If you have any other questions around language, please let us know. You can also email us at that email, and we'll get them answered for you. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.